Standing in my kitchen on a quiet Saturday morning, a process server handed me a thick legal petition. My stomach dropped reading the names. Robert and Susan Mitchell. My own parents weren't checking in. They were suing to declare me mentally incompetent to seize my entire life savings. In my family, love was a currency, and I was perpetually overdrawn. My parents, Robert and Susan Mitchell, had a very specific hierarchy when it came to their children. At the very top, bathed in an eternal, flawless light, was my older brother, David, down in the trenches, expected to shovel the coal that kept David's pedestal illuminated, was me, Clara. For as long as I can remember, David was a misunderstood genius. He was the kind of guy who read half of a Steve Jobs biography and decided he was destined to be the next tech billionaire, despite failing out of business school twice. By the time I was 26, David was 29, and on his fourth revolutionary startup. The first was a crypto mining cafe that bankrupted my parents' retirement fund. The second was an app for renting high-end sneakers that resulted in a lawsuit. The third was a boutique artisanal ice company that literally melted away. Through all of this, my parents never once blamed him. The economy was bad, his partners were thieves, the market just wasn't ready for his vision. I, on the other hand, took the boring, reliable route. I studied software engineering, worked 80-hour weeks right out of college, and clawed my way up the corporate ladder at a major financial tech firm in Chicago. I lived modestly, saved aggressively, and by 27, I had been promoted to lead systems architect. My salary jumped to a level I had never even dreamed of. I was finally financially secure. I made the monumental mistake of telling my parents about the promotion. It started innocently enough. A celebratory dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown. I brought my boyfriend of 3 years, Liam, a high school history teacher who was my absolute rock. The evening began with clinking glasses and forced smiles. Susan, my mother, wore her heavy pearl necklace and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Robert, my father, kept swirling his bourbon, staring at me like I was a horse he had bet on that finally paid out. "We are just so proud of you, Clara," my mother said, reaching across the white tablecloth to pat my hand. All those late nights staring at a computer screen finally paid off. "Thanks, Mum. It's been a lot of work, but I'm excited," I replied, trying to ignore the subtle dig. Halfway through the filet mignon, the other shoe dropped. David, who had been unusually quiet, cleared his throat and pulled a sleek, leather-bound folder from his jacket. "Actually, Clara's success is perfectly timed," my father announced, his voice dropping into the authoritative register he used when he expected absolute obedience. "David has a new venture. It's completely vetted. A guaranteed disruptor in the logistics space." I felt Liam stiffen beside me. He knew the history. He squeezed my knee under the table. "That's great, David," I said cautiously, keeping my eyes on my plate. "Good luck with it." "He doesn't need luck, Clara. He needs capital," my mother corrected smoothly. "Your father and I are completely tapped out from the unexpected legal fees from the sneaker business. David needs $80,000 to secure the initial patent and server space." I stopped chewing. I looked from my mother's expectant face to my father's stern jaw, and finally to David, who was smirking slightly, already looking at me like I was an ATM dispensing his due. $80,000? I repeated, the number feeling heavy and absurd on my tongue. "It's a loan," David chimed in quickly. "I'll give you 6% interest. You'll make money on this, Clara. With your new salary, 80 grand is nothing. You can pull a loan against your 401k if you don't have the liquid cash." I stared at them, a slow, sickening realization washing over me. They hadn't invited me to dinner to celebrate my promotion. They had invited me to an extraction. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. My father's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm not giving David $80,000. I'm not funding another startup. The explosion was immediate. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a display of theatrical horror. My father slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. "How dare you?" he hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the sharp tang of his bourbon. "After everything we've done for you, we raised you. We put a roof over your head. You have more money than you know what to do with, and you're going to let your brother's future die because you're selfish? He's 30 years old, Dad. He needs to get a real job." I fired back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I am not his bank. I worked for my money, and I'm keeping it." "You ungrateful little brat," my mother spat, dropping the sweet facade entirely. "You wouldn't even have that job if it weren't for the work ethic we instilled in you. You owe this family." I stood up, tossing my napkin onto my half-eaten steak. "Liam, let's go." Liam was already on his feet, dropping $100 bill on the table for our drinks. As we walked out of the restaurant, I could hear my father yelling my name, the sound echoing off the mahogany walls. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car door. I thought that was the end of it. I thought setting a boundary, however messy, would finally force them to back off. I was dangerously, horribly naive. For 3 weeks after the dinner, my phone was a war zone. I received barrages of text messages that ranged from pathetic guilt trips from my mother. "I'm having palpitations, Clara. The stress of David's failure is killing me," to outright threats from my father. "You are destroying this family. Do not expect to be in our will." David, true to form, resorted to passive-aggressive emails, detailing how my lack of vision was actively preventing generational wealth. Finally, with Liam's encouragement, I blocked all their numbers. It was agonizing, breathing through the guilt that had been conditioned into me since childhood, but the silence that followed was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to myself. Then came a quiet Tuesday in late October. I was at the office, deep into a coding sprint, when my desk phone rang. It was the front lobby security guard, a gentle, older man named Hector. "Miss Mitchell, I'm so sorry to bother you, but your parents are down here. They are causing quite a disturbance." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "They're demanding to be let up. Your father is shouting at the receptionist, saying he needs to inspect your workplace because he's concerned about your mental state." Humiliation burned my cheeks. "Hector, do not let them up. Please, tell them if they don't leave, you'll call the police. I'll be right down." By the time I reached the glass-walled lobby, my father was red in the face, jabbing his finger at a terrified receptionist. My mother was standing behind him, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, performing for the small crowd of my co-workers who had gathered. "Dad, stop it!" I yelled, storming across the marble floor. "What is wrong with you? You can't come to my job." My father turned to me, his eyes cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. "You forced our hand, Clara. You cut us off. You are clearly having a manic episode. We are here to get you help." "A manic episode? I'm working. Get out of my building before I have you arrested for trespassing." Security finally intervened, ushering them out the revolving doors. As my mother was guided out, she looked back at me and dropped the crying act. Her face was a mask of pure, calculated ice. "You brought this on yourself, Clara." I spent the rest of the day in my manager's office, apologizing profusely and fighting back tears. Liam came over that night with takeout, holding me as I shook on the couch. I thought the lobby incident was their grand finale, a desperate extinction burst from toxic parents losing control. 5 days later, the process server knocked on my apartment door. It was a Saturday morning. Liam was in the kitchen making coffee. I answered the door in my pajamas. A bored-looking woman in a windbreaker asked, "Clara Mitchell?" "Yes?" She thrust a thick stack of papers into my chest. "You've been served." She turned and walked down the hallway before I even processed what had happened. I carried the heavy manila envelope to the kitchen island. Liam poured 2 mugs of coffee, taking one look at my pale face. Clara, what is it? Did someone sue you? With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out the legal documents. The bold, black letters at the top of the first page seemed to blur together. In the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois, Probate Division, petition for appointment of guardian, conservator of the estate and person. The estate of Clara Joy Mitchell, an alleged disabled person. I stopped breathing. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thick to inhale. Liam, I choked out, handing him the papers. He read the first page, his eyes widening. What the? Alleged disabled person? Clara, they are suing for conservatorship. They want the court to declare you legally unfit to manage your own life. Read the petitioner names, I whispered. Robert and Susan Mitchell, he read aloud, his voice hardening with rage. He flipped to the second page. Represented by Richard Sterling, Esquire Clara, this is insane. They want total control of your finances, your medical decisions, your housing. I grabbed the thickest part of the packet, the exhibits and affidavits. My parents hadn't just filed a frivolous lawsuit. They had spent the last month building a meticulously weaponized, entirely distorted narrative of my life. There was a sworn affidavit from my father stating that my recent unprovoked hostility, paranoia, and sudden severance of familial ties were clear indicators of a severe psychiatric break. But it was the second exhibit that made my knees buckle. It was a medical record from 8 years ago. When I was 19, during my sophomore year of college, my grandmother, the only person in my family who showed me unconditional love, passed away suddenly. Combined with a crushing course load and the constant emotional abuse from my parents, I cracked. I suffered a severe depressive breakdown. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and eventually voluntarily checked myself into a psychiatric facility for 2 weeks to get stabilized on medication. I had been in therapy ever since, managing my mental health perfectly. I hadn't had a depressive episode in nearly a decade. Somehow, my parents had retained copies of those old, highly sensitive discharge papers. Now, their lawyer, Richard Sterling, a man infamous in Chicago for ruthless estate litigation, had twisted that history. The petition claimed my refusal to assist my family financially was proof that I was experiencing a delusional manic relapse, hoarding wealth while displaying erratic, self-destructive behavior. They claimed I was a danger to my own estate and easily manipulated by outside parties. A thinly veiled attack on Liam. They kept my medical records, I sobbed, collapsing onto a bar stool. They kept them for 8 years, waiting to use them against me. They want to trap me. Liam pulled me into his arms, his jaw tight. They aren't going to trap you. They've severely underestimated you. We are going to find the meanest, sharpest lawyer in this city, and we are going to burn their petition to the ground. On Monday morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I walked into the sleek, high-rise offices of Gallagher and Associates, a firm specializing in high-stakes probate and family litigation. I sat across a massive mahogany desk from Fiona Gallagher, a sharp-featured woman in her late 50s with silver hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She read through the petition in silence for 10 minutes. When she finally looked up, she didn't offer me pity. She offered a battle plan. Conservatorship abuse is unfortunately common when greedy relatives see a payday. Fiona said, her voice crisp and authoritative. Your parents are banking on the fact that you will be too intimidated or too emotionally devastated to fight back. They are using a very old, very outdated mental health crisis to cast a shadow over your current competency. Can they win? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Can a judge actually look at this and hand my bank accounts over to my father? Fiona leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. If you don't fight? Yes. The court leans heavily toward family in an emergency petition. But we are going to fight. We are going to demand an independent psychiatric evaluation, We are going to subpoena your brother's financial records to prove the true motive behind this filing. Clara, I need you to understand something right now. She held my gaze. This is no longer your mother and father. These are hostile litigants trying to legally strip you of your personhood for a payday. Are you ready to go to war? I thought about David's smirk at the dinner table. I thought about my father screaming in my lobby. I thought about my own hard-earned independence, the late nights, the stress, the life I had built with my own two hands. Yes, I said, my voice finally steady. Let's destroy them. The legal system moves with agonizing slowness, but the psychological warfare of a conservatorship battle is immediate and suffocating. My life became a series of billable hours and clinical assessments. Fiona's first move was to intercept the emergency temporary guardianship my parents had filed. They wanted immediate control of my assets while the case was pending. We fought it in a preliminary hearing. It was a closed-door session, and seeing my parents sitting across the polished wooden table next to their aggressive new attorney, Thomas Black, made my stomach churn. My mother wept on command, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, telling the judge that she stayed awake at night, terrified I would wander into traffic or give my life savings to strangers because of my supposed manic state. My father sat stoically, playing the tragic patriarch. Fiona didn't attack them emotionally. She attacked their timeline. She presented the judge with my recent performance reviews from work, a letter from my manager confirming my promotion, and, most importantly, my bank statements showing zero erratic spending. The judge denied the emergency petition but allowed the full conservatorship trial to proceed, ordering me to undergo an independent psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation was grueling. Dr. Aris Thorne, a court-appointed psychiatrist, cold and clinical, spent 6 hours dissecting my mind over 2 days. He asked about my childhood, my relationship with my brother, Brandon, and meticulously picked apart the 8-year-old medical records my parents had weaponized. Your parents describe you as highly volatile, prone to fits of rage and financial paranoia, Dr. Thorne noted, peering over his glasses. They claim your refusal to help your brother is a symptom of a severe empathy deficit brought on by a relapse. I took a deep breath, squeezing my hands together in my lap until my knuckles turned white. Doctor, I had a depressive episode when I was 19 because I lost my grandmother, who was the only maternal figure I had, and I was buckling under the pressure of my parents' constant demands. I got help, Nova. I take my mental health very seriously. Refusing to hand over $80,000 to a 30-year-old man who has bankrupted 4 businesses isn't paranoia. It's financial literacy. It's self-preservation. A week later, Dr. Thorne's report came back. It was a complete vindication. He concluded that I was highly intelligent, fully oriented, emotionally stable, and completely capable of managing my personal and financial affairs. He even added a subtle note that the familial dynamic appeared highly coercive and financially predatory toward the evaluee. We had the shield. Now, Fiona told me, we needed the sword. People don't go to these lengths just because they are disappointed, Fiona told me one afternoon in her office, pacing the floor. Perjury, filing a fraudulent petition, hiring Thomas Black. He charges $700 an hour. Olivia, your parents said they were tapped out. Where is the money for this coming from? And why $80,000 specifically? We need to look at Brandon. Fiona hired a private investigator and a forensic accountant. For 2 weeks, I tried to focus on my coding at work, while my legal team dug into the darkest corners of my family's finances. I was terrified of what they would find, but I was also exhausted from running. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was worse than a failed startup. It was criminal. Fiona called me into her office on a Friday evening. Liam came with me, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of my back. Spread across Fiona's desk were bank records, property deeds, and a heavily redacted legal threat letter. Brandon doesn't have a logistics startup, Fiona said bluntly, taking a seat. There is no patent. There is no server space. It's a phantom company. Then what does he need the $80,000 for? I asked. my heart hammering. Fiona slid a document across the desk. He needs it to stay out of federal prison. I stared at the paper. It was a demand letter from a private equity firm in Boston. 2 years ago, during his artisanal ice venture, Fiona explained, her voice steady and sharp. Brandon took on private investors. But he didn't just fail. He embezzled. He cummeled funds, using investor money to pay off personal debts and fund his lifestyle. The investors found out. They audited him. Liam leaned forward, his face pale. How much did he steal? $160,000, Fiona replied. They threatened to go to the FBI and press federal wire fraud charges unless he repaid the entire amount, plus penalties, within 6 months. The room started to spin. And my parents? Your parents, Fiona said softly, quietly took out a second mortgage on their house 4 months ago. They liquidated the last of their retirement. They managed to pay the investors $80,000, half the debt, but they ran out of time and credit. The final payment of $80,000 is due in exactly 3 weeks. If it's not paid, the investors take the evidence to the feds, and Brandon goes to prison. Your parents will lose their house to the bank, and their golden boy will be a felon. Tears pricked my eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, blinding rage. They didn't think I was crazy, I whispered, the horrifying reality settling into my bones. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to steal my savings to pay off my brother's felony. They needed legal control of your accounts so they could wire the money to the investors without your consent, Fiona confirmed. The conservatorship wasn't about your mental health. It was a heist. Armed with the truth, Fiona shifted our strategy from defense to a brutal, aggressive offense. We didn't just want the conservatorship dismissed. We wanted to crush my parents' ability to ever threaten me again. Fiona scheduled depositions. It was the first time I had been in the same room as my parents since the court hearing. We sat in a sterile conference room at Fiona's firm. A court reporter tapped away in the corner. My parents sat across from me, flanked by Thomas Black. They looked exhausted. The confident, arrogant veneer my father usually wore had thinned, replaced by deep purple bags under his eyes. My mother couldn't even look at me. Brandon, notably, was absent. Fiona started with my mother, Susan. She walked her gently through the fabricated claims in the petition. My mother, sticking to the script, lied under oath. She spoke about my erratic behavior, claiming I was hoarding money and laughing at my brother's misfortune. Mrs. Mitchell, Fiona asked smoothly, adjusting her glasses. You stated in your petition that you are deeply concerned about your daughter's financial vulnerability. Is that correct? Yes, my mother whispered, dabbing her dry eyes. She doesn't know how to protect her assets. And you and your husband are, by contrast, very financially responsible. Thomas Black shifted uncomfortably. Objection, relevance. You can answer the question, Mrs. Mitchell, Fiona said. Yes, my mother answered defensively. We have always managed our money well. Fiona didn't smile, but her eyes gleamed with lethal intent. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of manila folders. She handed one copy to Thomas Black and slid another across the table to my mother. Mrs. Mitchell, do you recognize this document? It is a public record of a second mortgage taken out on your primary residence 4 months ago in the amount of $85,000. Can you explain why financially responsible individuals would leverage their home to the brink of foreclosure at your age? My father's head snapped up. Thomas Black snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it rapidly. What is this, Fiona? He demanded. Fiona ignored him, turning her gaze to my father. Robert, perhaps Mr. Mitchell can answer. Mr. Mitchell, did you or did you not wire $80,000 to a private equity firm in Boston last month to cover the embezzled debts of your son, Brandon? The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a bomb dropping and sucking all the oxygen from the air before the explosion. My mother let out a small, terrified gasp. My father's face drained of all colour, turning a sickly, ashen grey. He stared at the documents on the table, as if they were venomous snakes. "Don't answer that," Thomas Black snapped at my father. He glared at Fiona. "Counsel, we are here to discuss Olivia's competency, not my client's personal banking. Your client's personal banking is the entire motive for this fraudulent petition, Thomas." Fiona's voice cracked like a whip, echoing off the glass walls. She leaned over the table, her presence dominating the room. "We know about the embezzlement. We know about the deadline. Your clients committed perjury on a sworn court document claiming this conservatorship was for my client's health, when in reality, they are attempting to misappropriate her assets to pay off their son's criminal restitution." I watched my parents shatter. It was a horrible, tragic thing to witness. Yet I felt completely detached, as if I were watching strangers on a television screen. My father looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see anger or authority in his eyes. I saw sheer, pathetic terror. "Olivia," he croaked, his voice trembling. "Please, you don't understand. The people Brandon owes. They are going to destroy him. They are going to take the house. We had no other choice." "No other choice?" I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "Your choice was to let your son face the consequences of his own crimes. Instead, you chose to try and declare your own daughter legally insane. You tried to strip me of my rights, my money, and my dignity, just to save him." "We are family," my mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "We are supposed to protect each other." "You didn't protect me," I said, standing up from my chair. I looked down at the people who had raised me, realizing finally that the umbilical cord of guilt was permanently severed. "You served me up as a sacrifice." Fiona packed up her briefcase. "Thomas, you have until tomorrow at 9 a.m. to withdraw this petition with prejudice. If it is not withdrawn, I am filing a motion for sanctions, a civil suit for malicious prosecution, and I will personally forward this entire transcript, along with Brandon's financial records, to the federal prosecutor's office in Boston." Thomas Black looked at my parents with disgust. He realized he had been lied to, used as a pawn in a desperate, illegal scheme. He nodded sharply at Fiona. "Understood." As Liam and I walked out of the conference room, my mother called out my name, a desperate wailing sound that I will never forget. I didn't turn back. I stepped into the elevator, hit the button for the lobby, and felt the heavy, crushing weight of my childhood finally lift off my shoulders. The following morning, at exactly 8:45 a.m., my phone buzzed on the kitchen island. It was an email from Fiona. Attached was a single, court-stamped PDF document. I opened it with a hand that I couldn't quite keep from shaking. There it was, in stark, undeniable black and white. Thomas Black had formally withdrawn the emergency petition for conservatorship with prejudice. They had surrendered. By filing it with prejudice, they were legally barred from ever bringing this specific, malicious claim against me in the state of Illinois again. The war was officially over. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt the urge to pop champagne or shout from the rooftop of my apartment building. But sitting there on a dreary, rain-swept Wednesday, watching the water streak down the floor-to-ceiling windows, I only felt a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. When you spend weeks fighting a battle for your own autonomy, fueled entirely by adrenaline and terror, the sudden absence of the threat leaves you feeling completely emptied out. Liam found me sitting on the living room floor, staring blankly at my phone. He didn't say a word. He just sat down beside me, wrapped his arms around my shoulders, and let me cry until I had nothing left. The legal threat was permanently neutralized, but the reality of what my family had revealed themselves to be was a gaping wound that would take years to properly heal. We didn't hear a single word from them for 2 weeks. The silence was deafening, and in some ways, more terrifying than their previous screaming matches. I took no chances. I completely changed my phone number and email address. I paid a premium to upgrade the security system on my apartment, installing high-definition cameras at every entrance. At work, I had a quiet, humiliating meeting with the building's head of security, providing them with photographs of Robert and Susan Mitchell. I instructed the lobby guards to call the police immediately if either of my parents ever stepped foot on the property again. Every time I walked to my car in the parking garage, I looked over my shoulder. It took weeks for my nervous system to stop treating every unexpected noise as a potential ambush. But desperate people, especially those staring down the barrel of federal prison, rarely go quietly into the night. The 3-week deadline the private equity investors had given my brother finally arrived. Without the ability to drain my life savings, my parents were completely cut off. They had no way to wire the remaining $80,000 to Boston. The investors, who had already shown immense and arguably foolish patience, did not hesitate to pull the trigger. They immediately handed over every forged document, every cumminged bank statement, and every digital trace of Brandon's embezzlement directly to the federal authorities. The absolute, devastating twist of the knife came on a chilly Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen brewing a pot of dark roast coffee, half listening to the local news playing on the television in the background. A breaking news graphic flashed across the screen, detailing a coordinated white-collar crime sweep that had been executed at a high-end luxury apartment complex downtown. I glanced at the screen, and my breath hitched in my throat. The camera was panning across the very building where Brandon rented his penthouse, the penthouse he paid for with stolen money. Then I saw him. Brandon, wearing a pair of expensive designer sweatpants and a distressed grey t-shirt, was being physically escorted out of the revolving glass double doors by 2 stern-faced FBI agents in navy windbreakers. His hands were cuffed securely behind his back. The arrogant, untouchable smirk he had worn his entire life was completely gone, replaced by a look of wild, wide-eyed panic. He kept trying to hide his face from the local news cameras. But it was too late. The news anchor's voice was crisp and clinical as she detailed the sweeping federal charges. Multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. The golden child, the misunderstood genius my parents had sacrificed me for, was finally facing the devastating music of his own actions. He was shoved into the back of a dark federal SUV, and the doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. The fallout for my parents was an avalanche of their own making. Because they had recklessly taken out a massive second mortgage to pay off the first half of Brandon's stolen funds, they were completely financially paralyzed when the other shoe dropped. When Brandon was formally denied bail by a federal judge due to being deemed a significant flight risk, my parents panicked. They frantically tried to leverage their house a third time, begging lenders for a high-interest loan to pay for his exorbitant federal defense attorney. The bank took one look at their abysmal debt-to-income ratio, the plunging equity of the home, and the pending late payment notices, and flatly refused. Within 6 months, the house of cards completely collapsed. Robert and Susan Mitchell lost their home to foreclosure. The sprawling, beautifully manicured suburban house, I had grown up in the place where I had been systematically conditioned to believe that my only value was what I could financially provide for others, was seized by the bank. They were brutally forced to move into a cramped, poorly lit one-bedroom rental in a rundown neighborhood on the far outskirts of the city. Their entire retirement fund was wiped out. Their pristine reputation among their country club friends was reduced to scandalous whispers and total social exile. They had gambled everything they had, including their daughter's sanity, to save a criminal. And they had lost, spectacularly. I didn't reach out. I didn't send them a dime. I didn't even feel the urge to gloat. I simply stood back and let them experience the pure, unadulterated consequences of the toxic life they had built. Shortly after Brandon's sentencing, Liam and I decided we desperately needed a fresh start. Chicago held far too many ghosts for me, with too many bitter memories hiding on familiar street corners and downtown high-rises. I requested a permanent transfer to my company's regional office in Denver, Colorado. The moment it was approved, we packed up our entire lives and drove west. I remember sitting in the passenger seat, watching the flat, Endless plains slowly give way to the towering, majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of my past finally lifting off my chest. Today, I am 30 years old. I am happily married to Liam, and we own a beautiful, quiet cabin with a wraparound porch that looks out over a valley of pine trees. I still work as a lead systems architect, and I am profoundly proud of the wealth and stability I have built completely on my own. I am safe, I am protected, and most importantly, I am entirely free. The conservatorship battle taught me a dark but incredibly necessary truth. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and DNA does not give anyone the right to destroy your life for their own gain. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can possibly do is look at the people who created you, recognize the poison in their hands, and walk away forever. Walking away from the people who raised you is never an easy decision, and it is a path paved with guilt, second-guessing, and profound grief for the family you wish you had. But if there is one thing I want you to take away from my nightmare, it is that toxic family members will relentlessly use your sense of obligation as a weapon against you. They will demand your peace, your security, and your future to shield themselves from the consequences of their own actions. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if they share your DNA. Your life, your success, and your sanity belong to you alone. Protect your peace fiercely, and remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of your life begin the exact moment you decide to walk away from the toxicity you left behind.